Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Director for the Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies, Chris Moriello.
Good evening and welcome. My name is Chris Moriello. I'm a professor of history and the director of the Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies at Salem State University. Welcome to everyone here in the auditorium, and also welcome to our remote viewers on Zoom, as well as those who are watching via Peabody Community TV. A few housekeeping matters before we begin our event tonight. The restrooms are in the back, out of the back of the auditorium, to the left and to the right. And also, if people could silence their cell phones for the whole performance, please. I've been associated with the annual Holocaust Remembrance Ceremony since the late 1980s. The Holocaust Center Boston North, which was the predecessor to the Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies, started this event back in the 1980s. For us at the Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies at Salem State, it is our most significant program of the year. Before we begin, I would like to recognize some of the organizations that are here, particularly our veterans organizations. Please stand if you are part of the Peabody Veterans organizations. I'm going to read a list of the different organizations, so please hold your applause to the end. The Jewish War Veterans of the North Shore, Post 220, the 26th Yankee Infantry Division Veteran Associations of the North Shore, the 2nd Corps of Cadets, the Marine Corps League of Essex County, Detachment 127, the Veterans of Foreign Wars, Fidelity Post 1011, Disabled American Veterans, Chapter 64, Portuguese American War Veterans, Post 1, the Polish Legion of American Veterans, USA, Post 63, Fleet Reserve Association, Branch 31, and the American Legion, Post 153. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your service. I'd also like to recognize, if they could please stand, the Peabody High School Junior ROTC, which has joined us as well. Thank you very much. Each year, our Remembrance has a theme. This year, we return our focus to the historical event of the Holocaust and the victims and survivors, including 6 million Jews who were targets of Nazi Germany's systematic mass murder campaign. With that focus in mind, we begin our ceremonies with 3 distinct Holocaust testimonies read by community members. The first, Sonia Schreiber-Weitz. Sonia was a Holocaust survivor who committed her life to educating young people about the Holocaust and human rights. She was a co-founder of the Holocaust Center Boston North, the precursor to our current center. Over 80 members of her immediate family were murdered in the Holocaust. She and her sister Blanca survived 5 concentration camps, including Auschwitz. When the Nazis invaded Poland in 1939, her family was forcibly separated, and she never saw her beloved mother again. Mary Kiley, a teacher from St. John's Preparatory School, herself a Holocaust educator and Holocaust legacy partner for Sonia, will read Sonia's poem, In Memory of My Mother.
Where is your grave? Where did you die? Why did you go away? Why did you leave your little girl that rainy autumn day? I still can hear the words you spoke. You tell the world, my child. Your eyes as green as emeralds were quiet and so mild. You held my hand. Your face was white and silent like a stone. You pressed something into my palm, and then you were gone.
you, Mary. Dina Gronowska was born in Radziszów, Poland in 1931. In 1943, she and her family were deported to the Blachhammer forced labor camp, where she separated from her mother and later from her father. She would never see her parents again. She was liberated at the Peterswald forced concentration camp by the Soviet Red Army on May 8, 1945. She was 14 years old at liberation. Her testimony, which she dictated to her teachers at the Bergen-Belsen displaced person camp, will be read by Angel Katzen, a student from Salem State University.
I worked in an ammunition factory. I was alone, torn away from my father and mother. I was working hard. The night shifts were awful. My eyelids would be drooping, but the foreman would be standing there with a whip, shouting, "Quota." I worked, the machines pounded, the transmissions, belts whistled, but before my eyes I had a vision of my mother and my separation from my father. The tears burned, my eyes are full of blood. I spent almost 2 years standing at a machine, always hungry, weak, exhausted. On May 8th, a few cars with Russians arrived. I was waiting, fantasizing, and praying to freedom. I was praying for life. Girls were fainting and others were crying, laughing, shouting. Where are our mothers? Why haven't they seen this moment?
Thank you, Angel. Kalman Zitwer was a liberator of the Mauthausen concentration camp. Throughout April and May of 1945, Allied soldiers overran and liberated hundreds of Nazi concentration camps, labor camps, and death camps, and encountered the realities of the Nazi mass murder of millions of Jews and others in the camps. On May 5, 1945, the 3rd U.S. Army 11th Armored Division, with attached units of the 26th Yankee Division, liberated the Mauthausen concentration camp and the subcamp at Gusen. What they witnessed would change these hardened veterans forever. Kalman Zitwer, a member of the 11th Armored Division, described what he saw and felt that day. His testimony will be read by Alan Lehman, member of the Jewish War Veterans of the North Shore, representing all the veterans who liberated camps.
On the way to Linz, we passed through Mauthausen concentration camp. The gates were already open. The SS commanders had fled. People were milling around. They looked haggard, very emaciated. There was a section for women where medical experiments were done on them. We could smell the burning flesh. We could see the piles of bodies. And we could see the rock pile where people from the concentration camp were forced to jump or were pushed, unclothed, into a pile of rocks covered with time. I noticed a young fellow limping toward me. He was in bad shape. His right leg was bandaged, but I think it had gangrene. He was dressed in the typical striped suit of the concentration camp inmate. However, his face was full. He was a young kid, about 14. I said to him, "Bist du a Yid?" And he answered, "Yes, I come from Krakow, Poland, and I've been in a concentration camp since I was 10 years old." I asked him, "Where are you going? You know you cannot get past this point." He said, "I am going to Switzerland, where I will be free." But I told him he could not walk even half a mile with that leg. The memories of the war make me proud to have been where I was. Hopefully, I was able to help someone.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you to our readers who brought these testimonies to life. We are at a moment in our national history when it would be quite justified to reference the Holocaust to confront the range of contemporary issues, from the fragility of democracy to the othering of minority groups, to rising anti-Semitism and attacks on Jewish individuals and institutions. As instructive as it might be to, quote, universalize the lessons of the Holocaust, tonight we would like to focus on the Holocaust as a historical event and remember and commemorate the millions of ordinary Jews and other victims of Nazi genocide. The statistics of the Holocaust are staggering. Between 1933 and 1945, the Nazis murdered over 12 million innocent civilians and approximately 3 million Soviet POWs. Among these, the Nazis singled out and systematically murdered 6 million Jews in ghettos, in fields of mass shootings, and in concentration camps, including 5 dedicated killing centers in Poland. The Nazis murdered 1.5 million Jewish children and displaced millions of Jews and other ethnic groups from their homes, their families, and their communities. Hundreds of thousands of Jews were left homeless in displaced camps for years until they were able to emigrate and reconstitute communities around the globe, creating one of the largest diaspora communities in the world. But it is not the statistics or numbers that provide the history and meaning of the Holocaust. As we heard in the reading of testimonies, it is the suffering, trauma, and sense of loss of each individual, their forced separation from all they knew and all they loved. Moreover, it is the very ordinariness and familiarity of situations and feelings that we relate to and emphasize with when we hear testimonies. Last October, I had the opportunity to travel to Poland to conduct research on a book that Dr. Regina Kazalina and I are completing on the Holocaust testimonies of children who survived the war. Of course, we went to larger cities like Krakow and Wrocław, but what remained with me as we traced these young girls' lives during the war and the Holocaust was the many small cities and towns where they once lived and the stories of tightly knit Jewish communities that once existed there. They had families. Their parents were artisans or owned small stores or shops. They celebrated holidays, played with their friends and their neighbors. Their parents participated in religious, communal, and political life of their towns and regions. The war and the Nazi occupation destroyed that world. We saw the remnants of ghettos in small towns, sometimes just a plaza or a group of older, run-down buildings clustered together. We searched and found the remains of small and large labor camps near these towns where people were worked to death. We visited far-flung concentration camps and granite quarries where tens of thousands died of exposure, cold, exhaustion, disease, and unlivable conditions. We also discovered extraordinary bravery born out of desperation. We visited a former ghetto house in Bedsin, which is currently being restored and turned into a local museum, where young adults gathered and planned a rebellion in the face of Nazi deportations from Bedsin in August of 1943. These young people felt they had to do something to let the world know what was happening to their Jews and their friends in Bedsin. Although they were discovered and shot by the Nazis in the courtyard of that house, their story lives on, and it lives on tonight. It is in their memory and the memory of millions of ordinary men and women and children murdered in the Holocaust that we are here today. They may have died in small towns or large cities, near their homes or in mass graves, labor camps, and killing centers. But we gather and remember lest we forget or turn their deaths into merely a lesson from history. In that spirit, I would like to read a poem from my mentor, Sonia Schreiber-Weitz, a Holocaust survivor, founder of the center, and educator, who took hold of me almost 35 years ago and would not let me go. She passed away in 2010, and her memory is why I am standing here today. The poem by Sonia Schreiber-Weitz is "What Else Was Lost?" 1 million Jewish children and their children's children. Unthinkable numbers, but what hurts the most is the haunting thought of what else was lost. And how do we ever begin to mourn the generations never to be born? A leader of man, an heir to a nation, a builder, an artist, clown, the cures undiscovered, the music unwritten, all the dreams undreamt or shattered or broken. Unimagined treasure, the losses unmeasured, unwept for, unspoken. At this time, please join Rabbis Benjamin Flax and Allison Adler for our candle lighting ceremony in the memory of the victims of the Holocaust. They will be joined in a few minutes by Vincent Raponi and the students from Higgins Middle School.
Good evening. We gather for Yom HaShoah not only to remember, but to listen. Because remembrance in Jewish tradition is not passive. The Torah commands us, zachor, remember, not as an intellectual exercise, but as an act of holding truth with honesty and responsibility. Testimony is part of that sacred work. It is the refusal to allow memory to fade into abstraction. It insists on truth, clear, unembellished, uncomfortable, and asks us to engage it with integrity. Survivors did not speak so that history would be admired. They spoke so that it would be known, so that names would not be lost, so that the world would not look away. In Jewish thought, we are taught, Ner Hashem Nishmat Adam, the soul of a person is the candle of God. In a moment, we will light candles. Each flame represents a life, a soul, a story that mattered. We often speak of 6 million, but the candles remind us each one was an olam maleh, a full world. The act of lighting is quiet, but profound. It affirms that these lives are not forgotten, that their truth is not denied, and that their memory is now entrusted to us. Tonight, we do not add to their testimony, we receive it. And in doing so, we commit to remembering honestly, listening deeply, and carrying their light forward. Zichronan libracha, may their memories be a blessing.
I am pleased to introduce Senator Joan Lovely, 2nd District, Essex District. Senator Lovely is a longtime supporter of the mission of our center and attends many of our events, including this one, almost every year. Senator Lovely.
Good evening. I offer these words on behalf of myself and Representative Sally Kearns and Representative Tom Walsh. I would like to recognize the Salem State University Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies, Higgins Middle School, the combined Jewish philanthropies of Greater Boston, and the JCC of the North Shore for organizing and hosting this moving Yom HaShoah ceremony, and the scholars and community leaders present here tonight. Thank you for sharing your expertise and insight, and for taking the time to elevate the voices, experiences, and history of our Jewish residents, our friends, neighbors, and loved ones. Thank you, President Keenan, for your continued support of the Salem State University mission to educate on this dark chapter of history so that it remains in the light of day. And thank you to Salem State University Community Chorus for being here and adding your beautiful voices. For over 30 years, we have gathered as a community to remember the more than 6 million men, women, and children who brutally lost their lives during the Holocaust, and to honor the legacy and memory of loved ones, friends, and neighbors who survived this harrowing ordeal. From the first stirrings of anti-Semitism under Nazi Germany in 1933 to the end of World War II in 1945, hatred, bigotry, and ignorance were used to justify crimes against humanity and the annihilation of the Jewish people. We must never allow this to happen again. It is up to each one of us, each day, to fight hatred wherever it occurs. We owe it to every single person impacted by the Holocaust, every family that was separated, every child that was orphaned, every spouse that was widowed, to remember the gravity of this time in our history. And as we still mourn, we also owe it to their memory to honor them in the face of those unimaginable horrors. I'm grateful to the Center for the Holocaust and Genocide Studies for continuing to advance this discourse. For decades, the center has worked to broaden the knowledge of the dangers of anti-Semitism, discrimination, dehumanization, and hatred, while reaffirming the importance of humanistic values, including justice, equality, and acceptance. And thank you to the center. We will hear from Karen Kristen, the author of Irina's Gift, and raised amongst a refugee community. Karen channeled that experience into understanding the generational trauma that keeps many survivors silent, to bring their stories to light so that the world will never forget. That is the power of human spirit, the tenacity to defy the odds and find meaning in the bleakest of circumstances. As Viktor Frankl once said, everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. So now, and in all the years ahead, let us choose to live our own way with love, empathy, and compassion. Thank you.
I am now pleased to introduce President John Keenan, President of Salem State University. President Keenan is a leading advocate for affordable, high-quality public education in our region and an avid supporter of the Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies. President Keenan.
Thank you, Professor Moriello, and good evening, everyone. It's truly my honor to welcome you to this deeply meaningful ceremony in remembrance. Yom HaShoah, or Holocaust Remembrance Day, is a day for remembering the 6 million Jews and many others whose lives were taken during the Holocaust. It is also a day to honor the survivors, those still with us, and those who have since passed away. Tonight, we reflect, we learn, and we recognize the resilience of those who endured unimaginable hardship and indignity. As we remember and honor the victims, we must also acknowledge the conditions that allowed this to happen and to commit ourselves to ensuring that such atrocities never occur again. We must reject the troubling rise in anti-Semitism, both within the United States and worldwide. We must reject acts of violence and attempts to dehumanize others. And we must come together to build stronger, kinder, and more respectful communities for all. This evening, we are privileged to have Karen Kirstein with us. Karen is the daughter of a Holocaust survivor. Her memoir, the book you saw out front, Irina's Gift, tells the story of her family's survival, and it was a finalist for the 2025 National Jewish Book Award. Thank you, Karen, for being with us this evening and for sharing your family's story. I also want to thank Senator Lovely, who you just heard from, who joins us each and every year at this ceremony. Thank you again for joining us this evening and being part of this moment of reflection and remembrance. We are especially grateful to the combined Jewish philanthropies of Greater Boston, the North Shore Rabbis and Cantors Association for your support, Preston Productions and the music director Shane, the Salem State Community Choir, Rabbi Matthews, Rabbi Rogozin, Rabbi Schwartz, representatives of the North Shore Veterans Association, Bob Dunn and Alan Lehman, Professor Moriello for his years of dedicated leadership to the Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies, Assistant Director Katsalina and Program Assistant Blayla, and to everyone who has played a part in making this special evening possible. Your commitment ensures that students, teachers, and the community are empowered to combat racism, prejudice, ethnic hatred, and the abuse of authority. This remembrance ceremony serves as a profound reminder of the commitment as the Commonwealth's Civic Engagement University. By encouraging inclusion, education, and open dialogue, we uphold our mission to ensure that our students achieve not only educational goals while contributing to global society, but also as ethical and engaged community members. Thank you again for allowing me this part of this evening's remembrance ceremony. And now please join me in welcoming back Professor Moriello. Thank you.
Thank you, President Keenan. Thank you, Senator Lovely. This year, we are honored to have Karen Kirstein, author, educator, and child of Holocaust survivors, join us. She'll be joined on stage by Dr. Regina Casalina, historian and the assistant director of the center, for a conversation about Ms. Kirstein's book, Irina's Gift. Please welcome Regina Casalina.
Thank you, Chris. It is my honor to introduce Karen Kirstein. Karen is an Australian-American author and Holocaust educator who speaks around the world on the topics of hate and reconciliation. Karen's essay, Searching for the Nazi Who Saved My Mother's Life, was selected by Narratively as one of their best ever stories and nominated for Best American Essays. She is the author of Irina's Gift, which is the winner, our 2025 National Jewish Book Award finalist and winner of 2 Zibby Awards. Irina's Gift was described by Pulitzer Prize-winning author Geraldine Brooks as, quote, a disturbing investigation into the power of secrets to harm and to haunt, end quote. Karen's writing has also appeared in Salon, Huffington Post, the Jerusalem Post, Boston's National Public Radio Station, the Boston Herald, the Sydney Morning Herald, and more. She has lived in 5 countries across 3 continents and now calls Massachusetts her home. Karen, will you join us, please? We are so fortunate to have you here with us tonight.
It's such an honor to be with you all.
So Irina's Gift is a remarkable memoir, and there are many moments that stood out to me and resonated with me as I was reading it. As a refugee myself, your mother's experience growing up in Australia as a daughter of refugees from Poland brought up memories of my own family's struggles. We were leaving the former Soviet Union, a very different place and different circumstances. But the difficulties of starting a new life in a new country where you don't speak the language, don't know the customs, and nobody really knows where you're coming from or why is something that speaks to, I think, a lot of people's experiences today. And like you, I also became the guardian of my grandparents' stories. My grandparents were children during the Holocaust, and they grew up and lived most of their lives in the Soviet Union. And the Soviet Union is a place where a lot of people kept secrets, and there was a lot of silence, largely to protect others. And much like you, I was fortunate to grow up with them, and they told me the stories that they couldn't tell their own children, just as your grandparents did. So with that, I'd like to turn to Irina's Gift and start by discussing some of the silences that haunted your family. There's a significant amount of intergenerational trauma, and it often manifested itself in silence and secrecy. So could you tell us a little bit of how it was growing up in Australia in a family of refugees from Poland?
Well, growing up, I always knew something was a little off in my family. I knew my mother and my grandparents were born in Poland. I knew they were Jewish, and I knew my grandparents were atheist and that they had been atheist before the war. And I would ask them questions, and they would dodge questions, and they would come up with the weirdest answers sometimes. One of my earliest memories, I was somewhere between 4 and 5 years old, and I was sitting in my grandmother's kitchen, and she was chopping onions and beets for a borscht, and it's like a soup, which you also had growing up. And I asked her about these blue-green numbers she had on her forearm, and she kept chopping, and she said, "Oh, that's my phone number." I had it tattooed there, especially so I'd never forget it. And I remember mostly my grandfather, he poked his nose over his newspaper. We were sitting at a banquet, and he didn't have the tattoo because that was given to people in Auschwitz, to those who were deemed strong enough to work as slave labor. But he had other scars that I didn't realize as a child what they were. You know, he would swing from playing hide and seek with me to when I stayed over, which was often. Sometimes he would be just sitting in his blue velvet chair, staring at a wall for days. But I think the thing that was most weird to me was this toxic relationship between my mother and my grandmother, Alicia. Alicia adored me, and she would take me to concerts and the ballet, and we would go to the beach and look for seashells. And it was as if she couldn't stand to be in the same room as my mother. My mother was a warm and loving person. She had a dark side to her too. I would often hear her sobbing between the bedroom wall, my bedroom backed onto hers. I know now that people who went through the Holocaust and people who go through war to this day, I have to battle with PTSD and depression. But she was also this optimistic person who had legions of friends. And my grandmother just seemed to hate her. And my mother always told me, when I found out more about the war later, that she felt like they picked up the wrong child after the war. She looked a little different to her parents. She looked like me, black hair, dark eyes. They had auburn-colored hair. And they treated their son differently. He was born after the war. Give you an example, she claimed that they beat her and they didn't beat him. And after she graduated from college, she got a pen. And when he graduated from college, he got a car. So there was reason to feel like something wasn't quite right.
And so, I mean, you were growing up at a time when the Holocaust wasn't really taught in school, wasn't talked about. So, and obviously not talked about in your family. So when did you first begin to learn about it? And when did you start to understand that this was an integral part of your family's story?
I think I learned about it Well, I did read books eventually, books that my mother gave me, but it was really after Schindler's List came out. My grandmother asked me to take her, not my mother or her son, who she adored, which I thought was strange. And it was a week or so later, she asked me to take her out to a restaurant. And this was somebody who never talked about the war. She starts telling me about Dr. Mengele, who the Auschwitz prisoners called the Angel of Death, and how he would line the women up outside for hours, sometimes overnight, sometimes in the snow, and how he would inspect them with his, he had white gloves, and he would point at them with his whip and pull them out of line and send them off to the gas chambers or off for his horrible experiments. And I didn't understand then why she was telling me. Of course, now that I've talked to scholars, I know that a lot of people who go through horrible traumas it takes another generation. They're so busy trying to get over the trauma and raise their own children that they end up telling. If a grandchild is curious enough, they'll tell a grandchild about it. And so it was after Schindler's List that I learned more.
And so what led you to make that first trip to Poland to begin tracking down?
Well, I probably need to go back a little bit, because before Schindler's List, it was a long time before Schindler's List, I think, when my mother was 32 years old, I was at school one day, and I was 9, and she received this letter from a stranger, a man in Canada. And she opened the letter, and a leather folder fell out with some photos, and she recognized one. She'd seen it on Alizia's dresser. It was a photo of her as a child. And the letter said that she had been born in the Warsaw Ghetto during the war and was smuggled out in a backpack and later rescued by a notorious Nazi SS officer. And if that wasn't enough to give my mother a heart attack, the letter said that the people she had come to Australia with as refugees weren't her parents, that her mother's name was Irina, and Irina had been killed in front of her by the Gestapo when my mother was a child. And the man who sent the letter he claimed he was my mother's biological father, and his name was Dick. And so my mother kept all of that secret from me, and when I was a teenager, I discovered that the grandparents I adored weren't mine. So because my grandmother told me, what led to the first trip to Poland was I moved to the US, and for the first time I worked with Jewish people. My neighbors were Jewish people. There were all these Jews in Boston, right? As opposed to the people who I grew up with in my grandparents' living room, some who had the Auschwitz tattoo. I thought of them more as Polish or Hungarian. None of them were religious. And so people in Boston asked me questions about my family, and I realized I didn't know enough. And so I asked my grandmother if she'd let me interview her. And I flew home to Australia for vacation, and over a week she told me the version of her story that I now realize that she was able to tell me. And on the last day, she said, I worry what happened to me is going to happen again. And do you think someone will want to know all this? And that's when I promised her I would write down her story, but my career in the US took off and she passed away. And so I ended up discovering a piece of film footage, which we won't show you today, but it was of my grandfather inside Dachau concentration camp after he was interviewed days after the US Army liberated him. And that was what sent me to Poland.
And so, you grew up with Alicia and Mietek, your grandparents, and once Dick became part of your family, he's the one that wrote this letter to your mother.
That's right.
You had the opportunity to get to know him as well, but Irina remained a mystery until you embarked on this journey. So can you tell us a little about Irina and her wartime fate?
So I went to live with Dick in Canada during my gap year, and at nighttime he would tell me these stories. When you're 18, you're not really interested in a lot of horrible stories. In my case, I wanted to see the world, I wanted to travel, and I I did find out the truth about the letter, it was such a novelty to have two sets of grandparents, and I don't think it hit me at 13 or 14 or however old I was. And so when I was with him at night, he was a very serious man. He was a facts and the figures man. He would have a drink at nighttime and he would start to tell me about how he was an engineer before the war, how he was a captain in the army, and then he would drink a little more and tell me what it was like when the Germans started dropping bombs on Warsaw, and then he would tell me about the camps, Dachau, Natzweiler, and I just didn't know what to do with all those horrible stories. But he did not talk about Irina. I say in the book, she was really a ghost. He left me, and so did Alicia. She adored her sister, and she hated Dick for reasons we won't go into today, but in some ways she blamed Dick for Irina's death. And so when I asked questions to Dick, like, what did it feel like when she was killed? Or what did you do? He just didn't want to talk about it. So I really didn't know much about her except for the fact that Dick told my mother that she was a very warm and loving person, like my mother was.
But over time, you did learn a little bit more about her fates.
I did.
Can you tell us?
So some of it was in this 28-page letter, which I didn't get to read until my mother gave it to me when I decided to research her past and go to Poland. And I learned that after my mother was smuggled out of the Warsaw Ghetto, there was a wonderful man named Roman Talakowski who helped find a hiding place for my mother outside of Warsaw with Irina, and she hid in an attic room. And the house, they rented a room, but there was a death penalty at the time for anybody that helped Jews. So even though they paid rent, Maria Kaczynska, who rented the house to her, was risking her life, and so was Roman Talakowski. And so that is where Irina and my mother hid for 11 months, until one day the Gestapo came and discovered them hiding there and shot my grandmother Irina dead.
And then after Irina was murdered, your grandfather, he joined the Polish underground.
He did,
Can
yes.
you tell us a little bit about
He did.
that experience?
He wanted to avenge Irina's death, but he also wanted to fight for his country. And so everyone in the underground swore an oath of allegiance that they would never talk about their activities. And I know that to this day, a lot of people in the Polish underground, they might tell their family right on their deathbed. Some of them never told their family members what they did. And so he ended up managing a factory in central Poland where they would hide escaped prisoners, Polish prisoners of war, and Jews under floorboards in a warehouse. And he ended up helping. So after Irina's death, Alicia offered to take my mother, and she had this auburn-colored hair, and so she was able to blend more with the Polish population, and she had false papers, and she and Mietek were zigzagging across Poland trying to outfox the Nazis. And so she offered to look after my mother, who was a very dangerous-looking child because she looked like me, she looked very Jewish, and the dark hair, the dark eyes. And so she would hide my mother's face with a blanket in her stroller when she took her out for a walk. So they ended up getting arrested because of that oath of secrecy, Alicia and Mietek were close to that factory where Dick was, and Dick managed to get Mietek a job in another factory. And they all got arrested. But Alicia and Mietek didn't know it was because of Dick's underground work. There was a roundup of the underground, and they were sent to this prison in Radom in Poland that was attached to Gestapo headquarters tasked with destroying the resistance. So that's where they ended up before they were sent to Auschwitz.
And so your grandparents, you already mentioned some of the individuals that saved them or helped. Like so many, they sought for help, and sometimes the people that they most expected turned away from them. And other times they received help from the most unexpected places. So can you tell us a little bit more about those saviors, the people?
You know, I think one thing I've learned is we shouldn't judge anybody during war. It's unless we've experienced it ourselves. There weren't many people that helped them. But again, there was this death penalty for helping Jews. I just recently met Roman Talaskovsky's son, so he's very close in my heart right now. But he was a business colleague of my mother's grandfather's, who owned a successful leather wholesaling business. And when the Nazis banned bank accounts for Jews in the Warsaw and started to create a ghetto, he gave nearly all of his money to his wealthy, non-Jewish so-called friends, and he gave a really small amount to Roman, who was a humble glove shop owner on the equivalent of Newbury Street. And he never heard from his wealthy friends again, even though the phones were working for a while in the ghetto and you could get mail in and out. But Roman, every month, even after the money ran out, found a way to smuggle in food to the ghetto, and he kept my family alive. He saved two members of the family. The rest were killed, and he was the one that found the house as well. And I met his sons recently in Australia. I've just got back from Australia. Ironically, they escaped Poland in the 1970s and ended up in Australia. And they told me he was just a really humble man. He didn't talk about what he did. And I know from talking to scholars that people who saved people told their family members that they were just doing what they thought was the right thing to do.
And you also met Maria's granddaughter.
I have. So Maria Kaczynska, when I took my mother to Poland, I ended up taking my mother to Poland. Mm-hmm. I had discovered a story online and written by Maria Kaczynska's granddaughter. So she was the woman who hid my mother in this attic room. And she wrote a story about the killing of what I later discovered was my grandmother, because I recognized a name in the story. And so we connected. And when I took my mother back to Poland, she had wanted to find the Catholic sisters, who we haven't talked about yet, but she was hidden by Catholic sisters for the latter part of the war. But I didn't tell her that I had found this place where she had hidden and where her mother, Irina, was shot and killed. And so I became very close to Maria's granddaughter, who died recently. But we were very close.
And I mean, you've alluded to this already, but some of the people, the most kind of important, I guess, ones that really kept your mother safe for the longest period of time was a number of sisters in an orphanage.
That's right.
So can you tell us about them and how that moment came about?
So you mentioned the essay about the Nazi SS officer. Mm-hmm. So there was, when they were taken to Radom prison, they were interrogated and tortured. And especially Dick, because he was a member of the underground, and I met a historian who told me how they were treated there. I was able to piece together what happened. Anyway, this Nazi SS officer was of Ukrainian descent, and he was my grandmother's interviewer. And so he interrogated her at Gestapo headquarters. And my grandmother told me that the women in her cell, he never sent anybody back to her cell alive unless he had broken bones or tortured them badly. But she claimed that he didn't touch her. And he was the one that ended up, through a complicated process, ended up finding my mother and taking her, placing her with these Catholic sisters who had turned a school that they had before the war into an orphanage for 75 children, but they couldn't put my mother in the orphanage because she looked like me, and there was actually an SS guard, an outpost on the property, and so they gave my mother to one of the sisters, Sister Cornelia, to look after, and they hid my mother in Cornelia's room, or Cornelia hid my mother in her room.
And so for a very long time, your mother had been looking for them, I think, or
well, she had these fond memories of them. And there was this wonderful man I met in Poland. I had met so many wonderful people in Poland who helped me. I didn't speak Polish, so it was very difficult. And when I told my mother I was going to go to Poland and piece together what happened to her and Licia and Mietek, I also wanted to find out why Licia was so unkind to my mother, but yet I knew from interviewing her and what Dick had told me that Licia had risked her life over and over to save my mother. So I was trying to piece together this mystery. And I met this man, Zbyszek, who was an editor of a Catholic magazine. And so he asked me to ask my mother to describe what the sisters wore. And they didn't wear the typical black and white habits. They wore civilian clothes, for want of better words. And so he was able to track them down, this order. And he spoke to the order's archivist. Her name was Sister Honorata. And she had record of this one Jewish child that the order had hidden during the war. And she also knew Sister Cornelia. And so she had heard the stories herself from Sister Cornelia. And so when I went back to Poland, when I went to Poland the first time without my mother, I met Sister Cornelia and we phoned my mother at 3 o'clock in the morning. We woke her up and I told her we'd found her sisters. So I think we have a film clip that we're going to show you now of my mother getting that phone call.
Just listen. Okay. Na Joasza.
Witam serdecznie. To jest siostra, którą Kornelii Jankowskiej, która się Joasią opiekowała. Tak. Tak, tak. No, ale to zniszczone strasznie jest. A tam był internet.
I remember them as mountains. I remember that.
You do remember that?
I remember being out here. I think I played out here.
Which is amazing because if the SS was in this building, they were watching you.
It's amazing that they didn't shoot me.
I know.
To strasznie zmarnowane wszystko.
What's that mean? They're friends.
So one of the things I didn't tell you was Jewish identity is really complicated, right? Yes. And my grandparents were atheists. Well, my mother raised me Christian. And I really didn't understand that until I took her back to Poland and saw her with those sisters. You know, she was raised by these damaged Holocaust survivors, and she doesn't remember getting a hug until from her mother's friend when she was 16 years old. And when I saw the love that those sisters had for her, I realized that that is where her faith actually came from. She'd sat for hours on that bench, on those benches with Sister Cornelia, praying.
So, I mean, you embarked on this journey to, in part, again, to heal some of your mother's pain and the trauma she carried with her throughout her life. So how did this journey shape your relationship with her, the rest of your family?
You know, it was really healing for my mother. It gave her closure in her life, but it also brought us closer together. I was the daughter. She loved me, but I disappointed her because I took off to the US to have a fabulous career, and I didn't give her grandchildren. And so she never really understood that. And I was sort of the facts and figures person and the bookish person, which is probably why Alicia chose me to tell her story, because she knew I'd be the one to look into the gaps, into the things that she couldn't tell me. And I would be like a dog looking for a buried bone for the truth. Whereas my mother, she handled her trauma in a different way to Alicia. Alicia was a very bitter woman, and she held hate for people all her life, even though she loved me. Whereas my mother, she sort of built this fantasy world. When she found out the truth about Irina, her mother, she had this sort of fanciful version of how she died. And I knew from my grandfather that that wasn't true. She said that there were other women there who held their babies, had held their children to their chest, and those children were shot dead. And Irina threw her on the floor, and that's why she survived. And that wasn't true. And I realized from talking to psychologists and trauma experts that people put together these stories to deal with, in my mother's case, to put this image together of her mother that she really struggled to remember. So, you know, I would do things that helped her realize that Alicia really loved her. She just had a different way of showing love. She couldn't hug. A lot of Holocaust survivors lost the ability, and people who go through war to this day, the first thing they do is put up this wall that stops them feeling things, that to cope with their own feelings. And so, you know, when I found after Alicia was rescued from Ravensbrück, after she was in Auschwitz, she was in Ravensbrück, and in the last week of the war, she was rescued by Count Bernadotte and taken to Sweden. But she was so sick from starvation that she couldn't remember her name. She had starvation delirium. And it was months later, the Red Cross, when she remembered her name, the Red Cross asked who she wanted to contact. And I found the record, and right at the top was my mother's name in Sushednov, which is because the Nazi had come back and told Alicia where he had placed her. And so when she saw that, I phoned my mother and said, "Mum, you know, you're the first person on the list. You're the first person Alicia wanted to contact. She must have loved you." And so those discoveries really brought us closer together and really helped give my mother closure and healing. She realized that Alicia did love her.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your family's story with us. Again, this is a remarkable memoir. I very much recommend everyone when you have an opportunity to read it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. It was just a pleasure.
Thank you, Regina. Thank you, Karen. Each year, the Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies awards the Sonia Schreiber-White Upstander Award to a student or students who stand up to hate and act as an upstander among their peers. The award is named after survivor Sonia Schreiber-Weitz. Candidates are nominated and awardees are selected by Sonia's family. This year, we had excellent nominations from teachers about their students. Our two awardees this year demonstrate the power of core values, engagement, and empathy. The first of our two winners is Lila Lobel from North Andover High School. Stay right here. All right. Lila became a custodian of her family's Holocaust history. She did original archival research and created a powerful video about her family's experiences during the Holocaust and their journey as immigrants into the U.S. To quote from her teacher's recommendation for her award, "Through presentations and videos, she has educated others about the human impact of anti-Semitism, hatred, and indifference. By putting names, faces, and personal stories to historical events, Lila has helped her peers understand that the Holocaust is not distant history, but lived experience with lasting consequences." Congratulations, Lila. Thank you. Our second Sonia Schreiber-Weitz Upstander awardee is Ruby McElhinney from Gloucester High School. Make sure I'm getting it right there. As a student in the multicultural community of Gloucester High School, Ruby took the lead in giving voice to Spanish-speaking students at the school. She started an award-winning series, Breaking Barriers, in her online school newspaper. To quote from her teacher's recommendation, "Ruby truly shines through her commitments outside of the classroom, particularly her impactful work with the multi-language learner-student community and her role as president of the Racial Equality and Advocacy Club. As president of this club, she consistently, willingly to dedicate her time and thoughtful effort toward ways to improve equity and inclusion at Gloucester High School." Congratulations. Thank you. Now we will once again hear from the Salem State Community Chorus and then from Rabbi Richard Perlman for the prayers.
I believe with perfect faith in the coming of the Messiah, a time when hate exists no more, a time where we remember not only hate, not only evil, but a day when we remember God's beautiful Olam Haba, God's world to come. They say on the day of the Even the angels in heaven cry, as new souls, as new neshamot enter the heavens above. And when we remember them, we remember all of the souls who lived before us. We remember all of the 6 million, all of the millions who came and lived and died after. We remember the righteous Gentiles. We remember the good, the beautiful souls of our people, humanity. And when we pray for humanity, we say the El Malei Rachamim, the prayer that reminds us God is compassionate, and God cries along with the angels when we are evil. But those neshamot, those beautiful souls, are in the world to come. And we join them. We get close to them. We never forget them, because they are us, and we are part of them, and we will always be a part of them, because we are one humanity. In just a second, I'm going to ask us, for those who can, to rise. Not just out of respect, because that's why we rise, but also to get closer to the souls in heaven, to get closer to God as we remember their souls and we pray for their souls. I will chant the El Malei Rachamim, the memorial prayer, and then my colleagues will come out and they will lead us in the Holocaust Kaddish. And at the end of the Kaddish, you will also be invited to join in the last few verses. And so at this time, I chant the El Malei Rachamim. For those of you that are able, please rise. El Malei Rachamim, Sholchein b'amramim, Hamatzei menucha nocha natacha kanfei ashchina b'mahalot kedoshim utachorim kezohar haraki amaziri l'nishmot kol acheinu b'nei Yisroel shenitbechu b'shoah anashim nashim v'taf shenechniku v'sheni yisrafu v'shenehergu shemastru et nafsham al kiddush Hashem began Eden tehi menuchatam Nabal harachamim hastirem b'seiter kenofecha leyolamim Utzeror bitzoror hachayim et nishmotehem Adonai hu nachlatam v'yanuchu v'shalom 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 amishkvotehem v'nomar Amen. Exalted, compassionate God, grant infinite rest in your sheltering presence among the holy and the pure to the souls of our brethren who perished in the Shoah. Men, women, and children of the house of Israel who were slaughtered and suffocated and burned to ashes. May their memory endure as and inspire deeds of charity and goodness in all of our lives. May their souls thus be bound up in the bond of Chaim, of life, and may they forever rest in peace. And let us all say, Amen.
As you are able, I ask that you remain standing for the Holocaust Kaddish. We recite the Kaddish for the 6 million Jews who were murdered in the Shoah, the unfathomably large number of souls of our brothers and sisters who perished, some who may have surviving relatives, some who do not. We hold them in their hearts, we remember them, and elevate their souls.
Yitkadal,
Auschwitz,
V'yitkadash,
Lodz,
Shemei Rabbah,
Ponar,
Ve'alma Yivrach Hirutei,
Babi Yar,
Ve'amlich Malchutei,
Majdanek,
V'chayechon Yomechon,
Birkenau,
U'v'chayei Dechol Eit Yisrael,
Kovno,
V'agala Mizman Kariv,
Yanaushka,
V'yimru Amen.
Yehi Shmei Rabba Mevorach Le'olam Olomei Amaya,
Yitbarach V'yishtabach,
Theresienstadt,
V'yitpa'ar V'yitromam,
Buchenwald,
V'yitnaseh V'yitadar,
Treblinka,
V'yitaleh V'yitalal,
Vilna,
Shemei Dekudusha Brichu,
Bergen-Belsen,
Le'ela,
Mauthausen,
Mikol Birchata V'shirata,
Dachau,
Tush B'chata V'nechemata,
Minsk,
V'amiran V'alma,
Varsha,
V'imru Amen.
Yehi
Shlama Rabba Min Shemaya, L'chaim Aleinu V'al Kol Yisrael, V'imru Amen. Oseh Shalom V'Ramav, Hu Yaseh Shalom, Aleinu V'al Kol Yisrael, V'imru Amen.
Thank you. Please be seated. Thank you for joining us tonight. Your presence, both in person and virtually, is meaningful and demonstrates a commitment to preserving the memory of the Holocaust and its victims. At this time, I'd like to thank all of those who helped make this event possible. First, our donors and supporters, including Combined Jewish Philanthropies and individual donors to the Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies. All our participants tonight, including the Peabody Veterans Groups, North Shore Rabbi Council, teachers and students at the Higgins Middle School, Senator Joan Lovely and President John Keenan, the SSU Community Chorus, Karen Kirsten, and the Peabody Police Department. Special thanks to our production team, Derek Barr, and the ITS department at Salem State, Rick Preston and his team at Preston Events. Thanks to Jim Palmer and his colleagues at Peabody TV. Finally, and most importantly, I would like to thank the staff of the center, Lynn Blair and Regina Casalina, who coordinated this event over the last 3 months. Thank you all. That concludes our event. Thank you very much for joining us. Good night.